Okay, we are live on the air. Welcome, everyone. We are doing another session of the Utopian and the Curmudgeon, as I have phrased this, called this segment. We have the amazing Gene Epstein and Jeffrey Tucker, who are both illustrious Austrian economists. And if you watched their last video, it was a whole lot of fun. They talked about Bitcoin last time, talked about value and where the value of Bitcoin came from, and fantastic debate. So if you haven't checked that out, then have a look in my videos and you'll find that. Gene Epstein is the former economics editor of Barron's and former book review editor of Barron's. He is the head of the SohoForum.org. He founded it and is the president of that organization. And Jeffrey Tucker is the editorial director of AIER.org. So make sure you check out all of their work there. AIER does some amazing stuff. Soho Forum hosts some amazing debates. So check those out. But I'm going to hop off this call after I have introduced these two wonderful gentlemen. Welcome to the chat, both of you.
Thank you, Naomi. And of course, you helped co-found the Soho Forum, and you made a very big difference in its infancy, which we could talk about. But I really basically want to talk to Jeff about our robots taking our jobs.
Absolutely. So I will let you guys go on it. So I'm hopping off the video and microphone now. If you have questions for us, I will be checking out our YouTube live stream and the Twitter thread that I've started. So send your questions there, and I will be passing those on to our speakers. Enjoy.
Sorry, my throat. Jeff, you're there. So we're going to address the question of are robots taking everyone's jobs, and I could plunge in. Do you want me to plunge in?
Go ahead. Way? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to take the plunge. I think that, as usual, we as Austrians and as empirically minded economists should recognize certain verities about economics. And the first one, which is central to this question, is really the simple statement, which is the statement about scarcity. What everybody wants always adds up to more than there is. So there'll always be plenty of work to go around, at least for the foreseeable future, because there will always be scarcity. There will always be a situation in which what everybody wants adds up to more than there is. And this is so often forgotten by the technical lunatics who talk about this issue. They tend to forget that. I mean, I think the other part of it is to recognize that if there really will be, if we really are going to have very extensive robotization of output, then since the robots can work 24/7, they don't have to rest, maybe a little time off to get them oiled and so on. Then output is just going to go through the roof. And so probably many people will go more for part-time work, as many people already have, because even with part-time work, prices will be so low, goods and services will be so abundant that part-time work can provide you with a decent living. And finally, just to set the groundwork further, as output increases, people do tend to choose leisure over labor. That happened, by the way, starting in the early 1900s, long before there were unions and government intervening. The work week descended from about 60 hours a week to about 49 by the 1920s, and is now down to about 40, 38, 39. If we do have, contrary to the myth that the unions brought us the weekend, obviously it was the soaring output that brought us the weekend. Workers tended to choose 35 to 40-hour weeks, 2-day weekends, and we could move in the direction of a 3-day weekend. And the reason I mention that is because that in itself will cause a huge increase in a certain kind in demand for a certain kind of labor, which will be, of course, the labor that provides hospitality, leisure, and often the labor that comes from ordinary people. So I think that in a way, we could almost just sign off because I've sewn up the whole point. How can robots possibly take our jobs, given what I've just said? Take it away, Jeff. And
no, I agree with everything you just said, and let me summarize what you said by saying, are robots going to take our jobs? And I think the answer is we should all hope so.
Okay.
because there's so much else we want to do other than the thing we happen to be doing right now. And I look back at my own work life. Every advance I've had in my own, I don't know, career, standard of living, whatever, has been about getting rid of things that I had to do, and having them be replaced, and then just doing what I have to do because it's not yet automated. So computerization has saved my life. I mean, like, even from the earliest age. I remember when I got my first computer when I was in college. It was like a Commodore 64 or something like that, and it changed my life. It allowed me to write papers that people could actually read instead of my terrible handwriting, and to be liberated from the manual typewriter, for example. I mean,
see, there's another case in which Jeff Tucker proves to be an outlier, both in his life and in his insights. Because just get back to earth in a certain way, Jeff. I have to say one thing, that the process of being sort of a public intellectual, like, writing, publishing, speaking, about the only thing that's really happened by and large is that you and I can broadcast through podcasts in the way that we have, radio, television. That's enhanced matters. However, you do know the odd thing that in the late 1800s, they wrote copiously, they wrote extremely well, and they did it with quill pens. So I wonder now, for you, in your case, I guess you required technology. I guess you would have been at sea in circa at the mid 19th century.
I don't know what I would have done. I mean, I don't know about you, but my handwriting is so egregious. I can't. It always has been. I can't even read it myself.
You're in a category with Charles Dickens. I don't know if you ever saw, Charles Dickens' copy that he submitted to the printer with the quill pen, and reading that copy, I get the impression maybe the printer wrote those novels because I can't. It's almost
can't make sense.
The printer must have been familiar with this awful scroll of his. So if you'd been as great a writer as Charles Dickens, then I guess you would have had a printer who would have deciphered your awful scroll.
Let me ask you about something, though, Gene, that slightly bothered me, and I don't know how to respond to it, really. Maybe you can explain it. But you know how sometimes we cite the existence of automation as something that is made necessary by virtue of artificially high labor costs. For example, minimum wages are going higher and higher and higher. So there's this higher and higher wage floor, and so no longer can fast food places afford the cost of labor, so they hire kiosks, and you see commentary in the free market community all the time. Oh, look at this kiosk at McDonald's. This is what happens when you have a high minimum wage. So there's your unemployment. But that seems to be in tension with this general celebration of automation as evidence of a higher standard of living, and yet we cite these kiosks and fast food restaurants and so on as evidence of the failure of certain labor policies. Do you see that those positions are slightly in tension?
Well, not really. I mean, I want to emphasize one thing, because I'll tell you another story, that while it was pointed out that in the 1950s, before you came on the scene, but I was around, if you went to a building with rich people or any kind of office building, there were elevator operators, people who operated the elevators for you. And then the union really unionization pushed through a big increase in wages, and then the elevators were automated. Now, the truth of the matter is, putting that in context, is that while the unionization and the high wages accelerated the process somewhat, of course, it was inevitable that by the way, the elevators would become robotic, so to speak. You didn't have to tell a human being that you wanted, the 19th floor. All you had to do was push the button, and it was user friendly, and it was easy for idiots. I mentioned that only because, by and large, the process that we're talking about at fast food is probably going to happen anyway. But of course, unfortunately, it's accelerating too quickly, and it's crowding out that labor. So I hope I resolved the point.
Actually, it's not a bad point that maybe this would happen. The danger of that kind of thinking, though, is you could say, well, then minimum wage, has brought us to the future more quickly. That it's given us incentivize progress.
Well,
and
but
that's not really what we want to say.
But people have to live their lives, and what it means is that if if you're 17 and you've got that job and then you lose it, then that's nice for the world to move more quickly in that direction, but it's denying you work experience and money that you could otherwise get. And so we want a free market to sort these things out, and in that sense, it does considerable harm. So what I'm saying, we can have it both ways. The point is that we do want automation to happen where it makes sense, where it's clear enough that as in the case of elevators, for example, it was very clear that the automation of elevators, the robotization of elevators, was going to be inevitable. And indeed, I like to point out that robots preceded the year of your birth. What were the first robots I encountered? Obviously, the coffee machines, the cigarette machines, and the candy machines. You put your money in, and then of course the robots replaced the bank tellers. We have ATMs, and that's been around for a long time. You may recall that President Barack Obama famously talked about what a threat they are. Those ATMs. The very fact that people of limited means who couldn't necessarily keep those bankers' hours could go to a bank at 8 o'clock at night and get cash out. That he forgot. That it was a wonderful service for people. And indeed, then of course the Easy Pass. Now the public sector is always way behind the curve, but they figured out that cars could go through those toll stars. So all that's been wonderful. And the key point that we forget, and which I want to emphasize, is that robotization is very good for people of limited means, people who don't have the time. It serves their needs because it basically does a lot of massive stuff that's fantastic for them. And so when you talk about how it's benefited you, that's very touching and interesting. But I wrote my first book on a manual typewriter. I can't imagine how I could ever do that again, because it would feel like walking down the street with weights on my ankles.
But you know what? I must say, I am concerned about one aspect. Maybe it doesn't have anything to do with robotization, but rather tighter and tighter regulations on work for young people. Now, it's true that since something like 1934 or 35, something like that, we've had laws against so-called child labor, which is to say that that you can't really get a job until you're 16, and really some jobs you can't have until you're 18. Some jobs you can't have till you're 21 in this country because of alcohol laws, right? But what's interesting about that, Gene, and I'm curious about your own experiences. When I was 12, okay, I still had a job because I didn't pay attention to these stupid laws, right? I mean, I was paid cash, but there's no shortage of work for me. I was tuning organs and moving pianos and moving fences and digging wells and repairing roofs and delivering hair care products. And I had so many jobs between the age of 12 and 16, and they shaped my life. And it was huge for me. What about you? I'm curious about your own. Was it expected when you were 12, 13, 14 that you would have a job, or were your parents the type that said, "Oh no, Gene, you must be, a great scholar and sit in the school forever"? Well,
I'll be happy to answer the question, although it sounds like a bit of a digression. But I was a rich kid, and I briefly had a paper route, but I sort of got bored with that. Although I will say that when I was on Tom Wood's show talking about my bar mitzvah plan, which is that everybody at the age of 13, as long as you can read and write, you basically start thinking about what are you going to do for a career, and then poor kids could start medical school right away. But I pointed out that the most fun I had was cleaning latrines and setting the stage and sweeping out at a summer theater, an equity theater in Rye, New York, and hanging out with the actors and having discussions about the various musical plays that were being put on, and basically doing menial work for no money at all. I was an apprentice.
How old were you?
Well, I was 15. And then I had to go back to the dreary high school that they were forcing me to attend, back to my life sentence of having to attend classroom. And so that was my life, my circumstance. But certainly, when we talk about what robotization will do, we always have to temper it, as you suggest, by the risk that government will get in the way of allowing the economy to sort this thing out.
This is the problem.
Yeah.
This is a major problem. I mean, this is true for a lot of things, right? There's a lot of good things that happen in the world, but then there's bad consequences. Even this idea of, you know, people's real fear of robotization is not so much not the robots, not even the automation, and not even the unemployment that might be associated with certain jobs being eliminated, but the fact that people can't retool themselves to change the conduct of their lives, change their skill sets, that sort of thing, and so then they get sort of left out. And there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that, except then we have to observe that what we need more than anything else is a fluid labor market, one that you can hop from job to job, you know, hop in and out of, to easily move around, get new jobs, and that's something we definitely do not have. In fact, I would say that right now the labor market is, despite the decline of unions and everything, what's actually taken the place of unions is vast bureaucratic paperwork.
Well, restrictive licensure of one sort or another, you know, to become a beautician, to become, even in one case, an astrologer. I think there's in one state you have to pass an exam, and so there are barriers to entry on all levels.
And even the bureaucracy associated with hiring right now, with the HR and the tax compliance and the background checks and the high cost of healthcare, for God's sake. Why are we attaching this to people's jobs? This is all terrible, and it actually makes the labor market much stickier. You remember Henry Hazlitt, when he talked about his first jobs, you know, he said, well, it was terrible. I was in New York and I didn't have any skills. So I would talk somebody into hiring me, and I would learn as much as I could until they discovered I had no talent whatsoever and fired me. But then I would have a little bit more skill than I had when I began, you know? And I would go to my next job and say, I know how to do X. They discovered I wasn't any good at it. They would fire me. And he said he just rolled through jobs after jobs after jobs. At each job he would get a little more skill. He'd get a little more experience. He'd learn
very hard to beat. Right? You know, I've beaten the system in different ways. I mean, but it's difficult. I mean, I was hired as director of commodity research at a national brokerage house when I was 26, and I didn't know the difference between a long and a short. I didn't even know commodity futures existed. I just talked my way into the job and scrambled and learned. And then luckily, when I got my first job at Barron's years later, because I'd written a book about commodities, and they needed a commodities editor, and then I transitioned to become an economics editor. So you can beat the system, but certainly in Hazlitt's day, it was far easy to jump from job to job, and then of course, and getting back to a favorite line of one of my friends, you know, if I can't fire you, I can't hire you. In those days, they could hire Henry because they could fire him at will.
Yes.
And then they hesitate. And then another part of it, which is huge, and a point made by Harvard economist Ed Glazer most intensely, just the fact that it's so expensive to live, for example, in San Francisco and New York, and the people hesitate to start jobs and to move to those areas because the real estate is so expensive because of the intense regulation on housing. So there's so many barriers, and indeed that's the part to address if there is ever going to be a problem. But I do think
that is right. That is right. I mean, we've got and the amount of so-called job lock that this huge big state apparatus is causing. I mean, I know so many people are hanging around on their jobs not because they love them, or even that they've got golden handcuffs, but they're afraid to lose their health insurance. I mean, it's amazing how many people are terrified and that gives bosses inordinate power over employees.
Absolutely,
It's just like, we shouldn't live in a world where so many people are unhappy with what they're doing. I mean, it doesn't make any sense in a free market. Even in the presence of mass automation, if you had the ability to just kind of bounce from place to place, and it became an expected thing that you would walk in and say, hey, I'm pretty cool, you want to try me for a few days? It was like, great, you know, come on. But that's inconceivable now. And
it's hard to imagine. I'll tell you something interesting that you know, Clifford Winston, who's actually a Brookings economist, he was once opining that we tend to think that there are too many lawyers, but really there aren't enough. I mean, the poor are served by those drones, not using the robotic drones, but those incompetents at legal aid, when in fact the idea that there should be barriers to entry to become a lawyer, I mean, it rests ridiculous. I mean, the two aspects of law that I've experienced as a user have been divorce law and then a real estate law, as in both cases. And it's plain to me in dealing with these lawyers that if I just told a firm, I'm going to volunteer my services for 6 to 12 months. And then if I could just follow you around and I'll assist you, or I'll even pay you a little bit, inside of 6 to 9 months, I could learn the case law and the specifics of that law and then practice. But then I can't go to law school and spend all that time doing that. So, and I mention that only because what's interesting is that people of high education who get beached, and let's say at the age of 50, what they tend to gravitate to, where the barriers to entry are very low, they start becoming real estate brokers.
I've heard this. I now that you say that, it's
exactly
really obvious.
Because you had, it's not a whole lot to take an exam and get into the field. But then why can't they just, make a transition to become divorce lawyers or real estate lawyers, or specialize in any particular aspect of the law by just paying a firm to teach them? Just the barriers to entry at the high end are also awful.
And by the way, the practice of medicine, is another case that's been regulated for more than 100 years.
Yeah.
And people look back in the 19th century and say, "Oh, look, snake oil salesmen poisoning everybody, blah blah blah."
Oh, yeah, right.
But actually, we've never had a higher distribution of health care information out there, and a lot of people have developed weird levels of specialization. But of course, they can't, because health is something everybody really cares about.
Yeah.
But we have this sort of priesthood, out there, that is the supply of whom are extremely restricted.
Yeah.
And for a reason, right? I mean, the purpose is to drive the incomes as high as possible. And now we've kind of nearly nationalized the profession with Obamacare, so that these people don't even have the discretion to make their own judgments. So everybody's being ruled by insurance companies. And we talk about the absence of a free market. It's just disgusting. And the people still, and then you listen to what the new democratic socialist people say now, and it's like all solutions to all existing problems of healthcare be solved by universal access and socialism.
A little bit more socialism, but yeah, indeed, certainly, if they want socialism, then, as you probably know, the Veterans Administration, the real socialism in medicine that we have, where the government runs it all, being celebrated by Paul Krugman as the face of the future, and then of course the scandals that plague that organization have now got them to shut up, and maybe they're trying to talk about something else, But Jeff, I think we're singing a little bit too much of a dirge about what goes on. Well, everything we've both said is quite valid and cries out to be changed, and certainly contributes to a maldistribution of income in the labor markets. But people really are incredibly resourceful by and large. We do have a very low unemployment rate, albeit a lot of people sitting on the sidelines on disability, and people do cope in different ways. And I do think that we have to stress that when we're taking it for granted that robots are really just going to shift employment in different directions and not take all our jobs, that we have people like Larry Summers, former president of Harvard, former very praised economist who was in government serving as Treasury Secretary, who actually gives voice to this concern that robots are going to take our jobs, and that it would be fine. At least I could go most of the way with Professor Summers if he would say, and that's because government is constantly getting in the way of allowing the labor markets to sort itself out.
But that's not what they mean.
But since he's such a government guy, he doesn't say that. And so you and I do have to talk a little bit more about this fear.
And here's the thing. If by robots we essentially mean machines that are taking over certain things we used to do, manually. That has been going on since the 11th century. and probably even since the ancient world. And
What's your nomination? See, your sense of history is just amazing to me. I mean, I said the first robots were the Coke and candy machines that I got fat on when I was a kid in the 50s. But you're saying, no. The first robots were in the 11th century. What was the first robot before the candy machine? Jeff?
Well, that's when we started getting technology for milling grain and using water to generate energy and that sort of thing. But I tell you, one of the biggest, the highest status profession of the 11th century and all over Europe was the scribe, right? And the scribe works very closely with the people who preserved the great music, of the liturgy, right? And they were the scholars and the masters. And then in the 11th century, the great Guido d'Arezzo invented the music clef and lines that democratized access to the entire world and basically made the choir masters and the scribes completely unemployed, all over Europe, to much the shock of many. I mean,
Jeff is parading his knowledge of music, which of course is way in excess of mine. The guy is an accomplished musician and aficionado of music. I guess I'll concede one point just to bring you a little bit down to earth, Jeff, is that I guess the phonograph was sort of like a robot because it could do. Sure. I say when a machine can do what we're used to human beings doing, and of course the phonograph recorded what human beings played and then it reproduced it, and so that's like a robot singing, and so
it honestly, Gene, it honestly does still shock me that in every generation, just over and over and over again for a 1,000 years, these reactionaries are so afraid of material progress and anything that makes our lives better. Really, technology in general. Yeah, and it's a pervasive fear, and I could give you just countless examples from my own work life that people are terrified of the next new thing for whatever reason, and there's an element of nostalgia associated with it. That there's virtue in that old printing press, with the ink, and isn't that lovely? And I know some people, probably you, like physical books. I don't want to hold a book. I think it's terrible. Every time I look at a book, I think, why did somebody print that out?
Okay. With that said, Jeff, I first of all, I want to agree with you about one thing. One of my favorite television series called The Wire. One of the seasons of The Wire was set in Baltimore, and it was about the Longshoremen's Union, and we have a scene in which these evil consultants are presenting to the company an automated way to unload the ship and to abolish all those jobs. And we're supposed to think, what creeps? And of course, my reaction, and hopefully yours, is that this was very dangerous work. I saw on the waterfront with Marlon Brando, some guys got killed unloading the ship because of an intentional accident. And so this dangerous work is going away, and we're supposed to think it's being brought about by evil people, abolishing those jobs. So indeed, I completely agree with you. But then again, you and I have to at least understand that when the automobile came in, and people who earned their job as blacksmiths and those who knew how to raise horses, and that entire industry, the horse and buggy industry, went south, then a lot of people got dislocated. And that was bad. And that, of course, that's the reason you and I stress that we need mobile and flexible labor markets so that all of those people can find their way to other things that they can do with their lives, even when they're 45 and 50 years old.
I think that these things go together, and the absence of that gives rise to these atavistic, revanchist, reactionary, nostalgia-driven politics of the left and the right. And actually, one of the most interesting things in our time, Gene, it's been the emergence of this kind of right-wing nostalgia, like, oh, let's bring back steel, let's bring back things that
factory jobs.
Oh, and let me add something here too. So you've kind of, like, I grew up with the advance of the information age, right? And so many people, and this goes for good free market people also, have disparaged the value of the information economy, as if Facebook's not doing anything for anybody. The Twitter is just a pile of garbage. Amazon's never going to work. I remember when that happened. And 98, 99, people were putting it on Amazon. And then when the stock market, crashed in 1999, everybody said, see, the internet's never going to amount to shit. It's all terrible. It's all just a big hoax. And now, of course, they say the same thing about the crypto sector and so on. Mm-hmm. But this kind of revanchist nostalgia is swept the Republican. I don't know about the Republican Party, but it's certainly like integral to the Trumpian worldview. This attempt, this hopeless and seriously destructive attempt to reconstitute the entire industrial economy in a way that would make it work like it used to work. Did I ever show you this piano? This thing?
Oh yeah, you told me. Look, that piano of yours. Are you going to talk about it in every session?
Yeah. It's 1907. I mean, like, no, 1870. I mean, we used to build pianos in this country. Now they're in Japan. Okay, so did we lose a lot of jobs? We lost tons of jobs. Anybody really want to work in a piano factory anymore? I don't think so.
You wrote a wonderful essay about the piano industry. One of my favorite essays of yours.
Thank you.
That was by you, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And that there was a piano in every home, and indeed, I mean, you win some, you lose some. But I think it's important to emphasize that if you really want to hold on to the past, then be my guest. And you may be partly right that you shouldn't let it go. You may be righter than the rest of us. It's not as though anybody's forcing you to just listen to DVD or CDs. And actually, I'm dating myself. I just listen to however we get music these days. Forgive me. But the point is,
are you listening to CDs still, Gene?
No, I'm not. No, I just keep forgetting how we listen to music. But that aside, the point is that Jeff Tucker obviously owns a piano that he loves, and put a piano in your home, and don't bring any electronically produced music into your home. Make sure your kids, I mean, if you want to force them to learn how to play the piano, and just did all of that wonderful stuff that went on in the 30s when everybody was supposed to play the piano and everybody got around the piano and sang. Right. By the way, there is a wonderful Andrew Heaton, who's a great libertarian comment. He brought me to a nightclub, a small nightclub in the village, and every night a bunch of young people get together around a piano and they sing Broadway show tunes.
That's so beautiful.
And with a live piano, and they have a wonderful time singing Broadway show tunes. And of course, it got me because I got amazing to me that there are a lot of people, kids in their 20s, who do love Broadway show tunes the way I do and the way Andrew does. And so, look, these things are kept alive. Keep it alive forever. My point is, to underscore your point, is that nobody's forcing you to get in.
What's interesting too about this, Gene, there's a sense in which technology actually does, in a counterintuitive way, it is the thing that preserves the past. No. We have to have future tech in order to make the past real again. I mean, just look at all the music that's instantaneously accessible to us. 2,000 years of music from all countries instantly with just a voice command. Unbelievable. Or the way we have access to so much literature from all time, and we never really had access to it before. I mean, technology doesn't just serve some weird notion of progress in which we're all walking around in spacesuits and eating pills instead of dinner or whatever. It's actually unearthing and helping to preserve the past and make it alive again.
Yes,
that's one of the great paradoxes. Hey, listen, we've got a question here. Somebody says, and I'm curious about your answer to this: which industries will be adversely affected by automation?
Oh, okay. Well, that's I didn't see that question, but well, that's of course easy enough to at least begin with the obvious ones. Retailing is bricks and mortar retail is definitely suffering. What's interesting, by the way, is that retail employment overall has been flat. Now, it should have been growing, but it's been flat over the last year or two. However, where there's really been a plunge has been at the big stores, at Macy's, places like that, where the plunge in employment has definitely happened. There's no question that that retail space is now vacant in lots of, and shopping malls, and I'm forgetting the more current term for shopping malls. It's called something else. Shopping center. They're threatened, and employment there is threatened, obviously by Amazon, by the fact that people are now no longer using retail to buy things with. You can go on the internet, you can explore a product, you can squeeze the Charmin, you can browse the. Barnes and Noble has been toppled. I feel bad about it. I own a Kindle. I get my books ordered on Kindle. And getting back to your point, of course, all Charles Dickens, Balzac, it's all available for free.
Balzac.
What? Oh, I'm sorry.
You like Balzac?
Well, I do like Balzac. Yeah. What?
Boy, that is just so you. I read, I think, only one thing by him, and I found it dreary, dreadful, depressing. I practically was, just wanted to double over in tears and misery.
Okay, then, Josh. Okay, Jeff. Let's answer.
Who wants to read that kind of crap? I can't even believe that you read that stuff.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about that. So, but my point is that clearly, retail is clearly being threatened by Amazon. And by, of course, apart from that, and Jeff Bezos has said, head of Amazon, as you all know, he has said that you really can't be the online store to the world unless you do food and clothing. And so he's now acquired Whole Foods, and he's trying to do food and clothing. Almost the last bastion, people tend to go to a store and they try on the clothing. They tend to go to the supermarket and they squeeze the Charmin. They want to look at the food. And Bezos thinks that maybe they can buy food online, and perhaps bricks and mortar supermarkets are going to be threatened. And I guess you can order a custom made suit by just sending in your measurements. And of course, a lot of clothing is just standard. So it's very possible that that's going to be threatened. So then the big question is, what's going to happen to all that real estate once the bricks and mortar stores are let's take it to the extreme and say that Bezos gets his way. There'll be more room for housing. People would like more space to live in. So housing prices, rental prices should come down as long as the government gets out of the way. And obviously, real estate entrepreneurs should convert a lot of that stock to housing, because that's probably the most logical alternative for it.
Why
not? That's wonderful.
Wrote an ode to the warehouse. I don't know if have you ever been in a warehouse? They're interesting places. You wouldn't normally. I wouldn't think of you as the kind of person to hang out in a warehouse, but they're actually extraordinarily beautiful and elegant and so clean, and there's a beautiful hum, almost like they're like cathedrals of commerce in a way.
You also mean the Amazon warehouses?
Yeah, any large scale warehouse. It's just the beauty of the interaction of human intelligence with machinery, and just the sound and the culture of the warehouse is very lovely. Everything's got to be super orderly, but it's also there's a strange freedom in the place. It's just.
Well, you mentioned the warehouse, and of course, essentially, that's what this is all about, which is that the goods are going to go directly from the warehouse to the consumer. They don't have to go through the retail middleman, and that's pretty massive. But
that's gigantic. It's gigantic. Of course, it requires. Well, anyway, because it's funny to me because my first real job, aside from all the other nonsense I mentioned, was that I cleaned a department store. And then I eventually made it onto the floor as a salesperson in the men's clothing department, and those are ever less a thing. I've noticed actually some of the most I've not seen empirical evidence about this, but some of the busiest examples of that you see nowadays are actually in airports.
Busy examples of what?
Of men's clothing stores.
Oh, yeah.
And retail in general. Airports are a great place because when I'm sitting at home, do I really want to fight my way through the traffic? Is 2 miles to go to the mall, or is I just want to click on Amazon and get my thing and have it delivered to me? I mean, the choices are very obvious, but when you're stuck in an airport, and you've got a 2-hour layover, then, you got time to shop.
That's a side effect of the ways in which the airports are so screwed up by the public sector. So you have a lot of downtime. So you go try on some underwear.
That's really
also, of course, the side effect of the fact that the airlines now charge a lot for crappy food, and so you buy a lot of your food at the airport. All interesting, but I do want to emphasize, however, that when you mentioned just sweeping out, cleaning a place, it was interestingly Robin Hanson, a real expert in artificial intelligence, said that ironically, this point has been made by many. Ironically, some of the jobs that low IQ people do, the sort of low IQ work you did in your youth, so to speak, if I may use the low IQ term because it's been used.
Hey. Okay, you can say that, but I was always been a smart worker, even when I was cleaning toilets.
Yeah, exactly. But my point is that I cleaned toilets, as I mentioned, that summer, and I enjoyed the work, and I swept the stage. But Hansen points out that actually you might think it's easy to create a robot that can do that job, but we have yet to conquer that.
For sure.
Yeah. So that he points out that where the jobs have really been decimated are the people who literally used to be called calculators. They were human beings called calculators. If you walked into an insurance office, you saw, I think it was mainly women, and of course secretaries generally, but mainly women who were pounding calculators, figuring things out, crunching numbers for the insurance company. And of course, now they've been all swept away. That sort of cerebral work took skill. Done. I wouldn't be good at it. And I was only getting C's in arithmetic, getting my numbers wrong, and couldn't imagine I'd ever go into a profession where I'd actually have to do calculations as an economist. But my point is that I want to emphasize one thing in answer to the question, which is that there will be plenty of jobs for people of limited intelligence, at least as far as as long as you let the market sort things out. Certainly, there are plenty of jobs, because one of the things that human beings do like is other human beings servicing their needs. So I think that entrepreneurs will always find some way to employ people of limited intelligence in different jobs.
Well, and this takes us back to actually the most important point made here, which you made really at the outset, which is that we live in a world of unlimited wants, and there are no limits to the amount of work that needs to be done.
Yeah. And entrepreneurs will sort it out and exacerbate it and made even more intense. Larry Summers, Professor Summers, should learn this, made even more intense by the fact that as output increases, people tend to decide, no, I don't want to work 60 hours. I don't want to work 49 hours. I don't want to work 40 hours. There will be perhaps a lot of people are going to gravitate toward the standard of perhaps a 30-hour work week, which will mean that there will be even more jobs to go around.
So what do they do? What do they do with the extra time? They drive Uber?
Well, the extra time, they basically have their 3-day weekend. I tend to like the vision of Charles Murray that these 3-day weekends or 2-day weekends that people spend, it'd probably be much better in a libertarian society if they took care of their parents, if there was more of a caring community which government crowds out.
Yes,
that
it
people
does.
would have more purposeful
with social assistance state, which actually, why don't we just touch on the UBI? I personally think that the idea of
what it stands for, Jeff, please.
Universal basic income, and it's become. Chris, you and I are especially bugged by this because it's become a very fashionable idea in certain Republican and libertarian politics, is somehow that it's an alternative to the welfare state. It seems to me it's the embodiment of the welfare state. You're never going to replace the existing structure with a universal UBI, and even if you could, I think it would be a disaster because the expense is outrageous. But aside from that, these entry-level positions are hugely important economically, and I think culturally.
Yeah, well, sure.
I mean, so what I find very, very interesting is why I asked you about your first job. It's like anytime you want to have a good dinner conversation, just ask somebody, "What was your first job?" Oh, it was awesome, and they always tell an exciting story. Now, if you change the question and say, "What do you remember most about your 4th grade class in mathematics?" Okay, now that is a killer. of a topic, right?
Well, so okay, you're all right. I'll go with your point, Jeff. I think you're probably exaggerating a little bit. I mean, as a matter of fact, in fact, when I was talking with a bunch of college friends, maybe when I was a sophomore, freshman in college, everybody's talking about their first paycheck. When the paycheck, they're actually paying you to do something. Maybe that's just a bunch of Jewish friends, Jeff. But,
yeah, I was going to say, Gene, none of my friends ever cared anything about money, so I don't know who you are.
That's why, hence the old joke, why did God make Gentiles? Because somebody's got to pay retail. But that aside,
I genuinely wanted to be useful, and
yeah.
And the money was interesting. It wasn't that of course everybody needs money, right? But what I saw the money at the end of the day was a kind of a sign and a seal of the fact that I was valuable to somebody for some reason, and that affirmed my humanity and my dignity, and the contrast to school was gigantic. It was nothing that happens in school. You think you can give somebody a grade, and that's going to somehow you can convince them, that they've done something valuable. It's just not believable. Yeah. But work in a commercial space where you work, and you're doing something that needs to be done for other people, in exchange for which you get payment.
Well, that's well put. Absolutely. But getting back to the UBI, indeed, it's a strange collection of people who want the UBI. Charles Murray, of course, is the most notorious. When I heard him defend the UBI and where he was predicting that in 8 to 9 years our jobs will be gone, and then made statements like that people are just not working, they're on the sidelines because there are no jobs, I raised my hand and I said, Charles Murray, you just repudiated some of your finest books, because you have pointed out that people aren't working because they are being given immense welfare benefits that make it very costly to get a job. And you are now just undercutting your own.
That's the strangest thing. It's the strangest thing. I can't follow his thinking on this at all. It also seems very pie in the sky. I mean, none of us are central planners. We're not going to be able to go to government and say, here, why don't you get rid of these following 83 programs and replace them with my one smart idea. That never can happen.
Well,
that will never.
Wait, no, okay. You're right. At least, but for what it's worth, we do, at least let's go with it and say that Murray and others stipulate that the UBI has to replace everything else. So they stipulate that. But then
you can't. To me, this is no different from Khrushchev's plan for next year's grain production.
Okay, but
none of us is a central planner over the state.
Okay,
and we can't. I mean, intellectuals can write books, but there's no levers for them to pull. And here's the other thing: the welfare state, as it exists right now, exists for a reason. Bad reasons, but it is there for a reason. As an example, food stamps, right? So if anybody believes that the purpose of food stamps is to get food to the poor, then you're extremely naive. This is a program administered by the Department of Agriculture as a massive subsidy to big agriculture.
Yes.
Right? That's the purpose of food stamps. And so how you, as a UBI supporting a designer of government, are you going to deal with that?
Okay, you're right, Jeff. And of course, let me underscore your point. Of course, government has a food stamp program that is absolutely massive. At the same time, that its policies make food more expensive by subsidizing farmers. So all of that, of course, is just mafioso actions on the part of government. Yeah. Absolutely. But Jeff, I want to get back to basics. And you're right that Murray will probably not get his way. But let's at least get back to first principles and ask, do we really want a society in which the UBI essentially says you never have to work for the rest of your life? We're going to give you a basic income.
Especially catastrophic, especially for young people. It's like I always wanted to work. Maybe you did too. But most, I'm not sure that that's a universal attitude. I mean, a lot of 14, 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds have to be, pushed into the workplace because it takes, the opportunity costs for them are very high. They could be home gaming, they could be texting with their girlfriend, whatever, out doing sports or God knows what, right?
Well,
and so bagging groceries is not what they want to do, and yet it's really essential to the formation of this. I'm sorry to even say the words, but it's just reality. The work ethic.
Oh well, having dignity in life, having a purpose. People who work are happier. But let me get down to numbers, which is interesting. There was a couple of books published about the UBI, reviewed in the New York Times by Robert Reich, who was Labor Secretary under Clinton and quite a voice for progressivism. And he, of course, liked these books. And he said that one of the books is asking that every person who over the age of 18 gets $1,000 a month for life, $12,000 a year. And Reich said, well, but of course you can't live on that. People are going to work anyway. And actually, if you crunch the numbers, we could have three people could live together, or you and I could open boarding houses in the Midwest cheaply, and we could charge them each, $800 a month and give them a $200 stipend, and we can make a profit. The fact is that $1,000 a piece of people pool themselves, or indeed, obviously, these people are going to be disorganized. We could go into business and turn out a welfare hotel. They ship 2 or 3 to a room, and they pay us. We could make a good profit. I mean, Ed Glazer, I think, has put it best. Again, a Harvard free market economist whom I admire. He said, this is really the stuff of dystopian novels. Let's we need a Franz Kafka to write about this. We'll have a universal basic income. Everybody gets $1,000 a month, and 40% of the population will be living in these boarding houses, just doing nothing all day. Well, maybe the other 60% are going to work, if that many. It really will cause that kind of dystopia, and it's amazing to me. Amazing. I mean, look, the risks that it can do so, because as you say, people who are 16, 17, 18, they're nervous about the world. Give them $1,000 a month for the rest of their lives, and then they'll get together and live in commune, 9 to 10 at a time. They're grossing $10,000 a month if there's 10 to an apartment. They can do it. You can make it.
It's utterly beyond me. Let me ask you something. Why do you suppose? So I think this idea of this UBI, I first began to hear about it maybe 3 or 4 years ago, something like that. And now it seems to have really caught hold in especially in this sort of soft libertarian world. It's ever more
libertarians. What do you mean?
Like Charles Murray is a good example.
He's an outlier, Jeff. Unless you can say me different, I don't know.
I think the Niskanen Institute has favored this. The Niskanen Institute. The Niskanen, it's kind of an neoliberal.
Oh, right. I guess so.
And I just seems like I bump into more and more people who are advocates of this. And I'd love to hear your speculations on why. My sense is that some of these guys just get tired of the claim that they don't care about the poor. And so they want to rally around some program which they think would be better than the welfare state, but also seems very, very generous to the unfortunate. But I think it's what's your sense of that?
Well, I guess you're right, and I guess if I want to dignify it further, then I guess let's hope that these guys recognize that it's the state that makes people poor, that food is more expensive than it needs to be because of government policies, and that the possibility of people of limited means getting jobs as cosmeticians, as beauticians, of driving, the idea that a poor man had to buy a taxi medallion in order to drive a car, all of those things. All of those barriers that make it difficult for poor people to get jobs, the burden of school that makes it necessary for a poor woman, a girl or guy to have to go all the way through college in order to qualify for med school. All of those requirements, not a burden on the rich, but obviously a big burden on the poor. All of those policies. Government Against the Poor, a book that was actually written by, I forget who, I think it was George Reisman, or Government Against the Economy. But they're tired of reminding people that the poor could do a lot better if government would only get off their backs. But so then they say, look, okay, society's rich enough, let's just give them a universal basic income. Now,
doesn't it strike you as strange, though, that all these, I guess we just call them these wild jobs programs, government jobs, these nostrums, these UBI on the right, and then you've got the Democratic Socialists all advocating for this big government jobs programs like the New Deal, and everybody's trying to solve the problem of jobs and employment at a time when unemployment, where we actually experience an extreme labor shortage. I mean, look at
that's true. Well, that's true. No, so that's why I emphasize that people are resourceful, and certainly we're at the upside of the business cycle, and of course, business cycles are a whole other story about how it persecutes the poor and how government brings them about. But I will say that it's great, of course, that we have a low unemployment rate. Terrible that we have a whole lot of people, a whole lot of men, basically just watching television all day, getting their drugs from Medicaid, and watching TV all day, and living on disability. All of that stuff is horrible. But more specifically, we do have a low unemployment rate, but we would have a lot of people who could get better opportunities if only real estate weren't so expensive in San Francisco and New York, if only there weren't barriers to becoming lawyers or beauticians. All of those things really would make a huge difference. But it is
and privatizing healthcare, health insurance. I mean, this is I'm sorry to go back to this, but I think this is a calamity, really, that we've tied healthcare to employment. Ironically, it's not empowered workers at all. It's actually had the opposite effect. And day to day, this is a gigantic consideration for the average working person. Where you take away people's health care, and you're going to really diminish the quality of their lives dramatically. And Obamacare was a calamity in that respect. It was catastrophic. And it's one of the sad things that I've seen over the last year and a half, that one of the reasons Trump won was to do something about the Obamacare, because I never really believed anything this guy ever said. So, but the Republicans completely given up with their plans to emancipate people from the healthcare bureaucracies.
Yes, I just saw a question, and we should.
Okay.
Somebody is asking about what will happen to low-skilled people who bag groceries at supermarkets.
Well, this speaks to exactly what we're talking about. I mean, we need to liberalize the job markets especially for young people and entry-level jobs, so that there are alternatives. I mean, bagging groceries is a glorious first job.
Well, yes, but
it's also one of the very few that are left, by the way.
Well, just a moment. I want to emphasize this nuance, Jeff. I'm saying that there will be, people are resourceful. There will be jobs. Unless now, the only real threat, I guess, to those people who bag the groceries is if the minimum wage goes to 20 an hour and prices them out completely. That will be hard. Although, by the way, the other real untold story about the minimum wage is that it's very hard to enforce, and that while big box stores that might pay very low wages will be affected, there's lots of stores that will be businesses that will be beneath the radar that can pay market wages. So even that will be. My point is that the dirge that you want to say, I want to address the bagging groceries point, which is that people really are convinced, apparently, that the only jobs for people of low skills, young people, are bagging groceries. There's jobs in kitchens, there's jobs in hotels, there's jobs on cruise ships. The labor. If you just look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers, you'll find that what has actually soared are indeed the low wage, low skilled jobs for people of limited skills in the areas that I just mentioned.
I think it's true, but however,
The old people need those grocery baggers to help them out of bed. My stepmother got out of bed, fell, and died. Had there been one of those people around there to tend to her, that accident wouldn't have happened. There's a vast number of jobs for people of limited skills that go begging or that could be created.
It's true. It's true at some level, at some age, but in the case of bagging groceries in particular, one of the reasons that those tends to be a first job is that there's very few first jobs that are out there. I mean, kids are not permitted to work in kitchens. Government regulations don't allow them.
All right, okay.
And they can't serve yet because you have to be 18 to serve alcohol in this country. Yeah. So, there's ever fewer jobs available for that 14, 15, and 16 age range.
I think you're going, well, okay. I mean, look, I mean, there's, delivering things, people are constantly.
True.
Pizza, I think you're thinking a little bit too much of a dirge about that. If you want to get a job, then people, what's really happening again, the retail store is not delivering, but then FedEx is, and there's a vast need for people to deliver. Indeed, it's true possibly that drones might deliver that stuff. I mean, that's possibly in the future. Of course, as you said, of course, you can't drive a car if you're 16, so you can't get a job driving Uber. And
it's cruel. And I tend to focus about young people here only because I think that's so formative. Well, for our lives. I mean, I think about the jobs I had between 12 and 17. Yeah. It shaped my life. So Naomi's telling us we have to wrap up, and she wants a prediction about the future. And let me just say this: just two things that have startled me. One has been the use in audio of artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things, in particular, home assistants. I have them everywhere. I carry them with me because I love them so much. I can't believe how wonderful they are, and it's all come about so fast, so dramatically, all within the last 5 years. It's absolutely startling. Another thing that shocks me is driverless cars. That seems like some sort of weird science fiction thing that when I was a kid, it's inconceivable, and yet it's really become a part of our reality.
It's part of the possible future 10 to 15 years from now, absolutely. But I guess I want to emphasize two things: that human contact will always matter to consumers. And different kinds of human contact matter, and people want other people servicing their needs. There will always be jobs for everyone on all levels, as long as entrepreneurs are allowed to do their thing. And then, just casting back into history, in the mid-1950s, the influential mathematician Norbert Wiener predicted that inside of a few years there would be no jobs left. Cybernetics was the enemy, and all those machines would take our jobs. And the left wing in the 1960s was predicting the same thing. It's a very old story.
And by the way, aren't there still states or communities or cities in which you're not allowed to pump your own gas?
Well, in New Jersey, by the way, you're not allowed to. Yeah, there's a rule against it. But you're not. You have to use somebody to pump it for you. Absolutely. And of course, that makes no sense either. But my point is that, again, there'll always be scarcity. Wants will always be out there. The scarcest resource of all will always be human labor. And we look forward, Jeff and I, to the future when human labor can do more interesting things, to the extent that robots replace human labor in the less interesting things.
Absolutely. We're in total agreement, despite my utopianism and your curmudgeonism.
Yes.
I think we're totally agreement. It's good to see you today.
Yes.
And here's Naomi.
I'm just coming back on. I did add another question. Someone was chatting talking in the chat about Jordan Peterson's point that you have what about the lowest IQ level in society? The bottom 10%. What do they do in a future society?
Yes, indeed.
I'll hop off again.
The lowest 10%. Yeah, indeed. Obviously, first of all, those people do have jobs. Secondly, entrepreneurs will find jobs for them to do. But third, that there are, I could list a whole lot of things that people of that low IQ can be trained to do, and that includes helping old people around nursing homes. We've got a massive need for those people. That includes working in kitchens. That includes chopping food, working for chefs. In fact, the demand for those people has been soaring of late, and the idea that those human beings will not find something to do in the advanced economy when human beings are always in short supply, I think that's ridiculous.
Well, and I agree with everything you just said, and just want to add that so long as there's a government, there'll always be jobs available for the lowest IQ people.
On that note,
it's good to see you, Gene.
Yeah, thank you.
So this has been wonderful. I really appreciate you guys chatting and being here. And I think that the live stream's been going crazy. Everyone's been having a good time there. So this has been really, really wonderful. We are making this an ongoing segment because Gene and Jeffrey are two of the most interesting people that I know. I love them both dearly, and they're always absolutely fascinating. And they never quite agree on everything too. So that's why I like them having them on, because they're both libertarians, but they start from this understanding and then grow from there. So I always learn so much. So thank you both. If anyone has a topic for next time, what you would like to hear them talk about.
Our money discussion at some point, because I think Gene and I have very different views on this.
Well, it's funny because before we started this live stream, we had just 5 minutes. I was like, okay, well, let's just hang tight. We're about to go live, you know, just relax. And I literally had to break up another argument. They were continuing the Bitcoin fight from last week.
Why I'm right and why Jeffrey's wrong. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you know what I'm going to do in the meantime? We have to continue that discussion. And I'm going to read this book by this Bitcoin maximalist who I think you would agree with this book, and I'm almost certain I disagree with it, but I can't say because I haven't read it. So
who's it by?
What's the book?
I forget his name. It's called One Money to Bitcoin, the One Money to Rule the World, something like that. And,
okay, well, I'll send you a reminder to send me the title, Jeff. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so maybe we'll do another Bitcoin discussion because that was awesome and everyone loved
it.
Yeah,
and trending towards this monetary discussion, where Gene thinks that there's always and everywhere a tendency to gravitate towards one and only money. You know, as if Gene and only Gene knows exactly what money should be, and he can tell us what.
It's beginning already. It's already starting. Yeah, no, I'm excited about a tokenized economy, but this conversation for next time. Thank you both so much. Everyone enjoy your Sunday, and thank you so much for stopping by. This has been awesome.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.